The year is 2005, and a small indie game developer known as the Behemoth are about to reveal their next game. You play as one of 4 knights on an epic quest to save the kingdom's princesses. This game was called Ye Olde Side Scroller. So Castle Crashers has recently turned 16 years old, and we are still somehow getting a new DLC. So to celebrate, I thought it would be a great idea to go through the complete history of Castle Crashers. With help from my Discord server, especially Low Polyfire, you are amazing, we have been unearthing the lost media that was the Castle Crashers development. And man, this footage is terrible. Granted, it was 2005 when the monitors were big enough for cats to sleep on. So to help me go through this old footage, I contacted Dan Paladin and Tom Fulp. So with that being said, this is the complete history of Castle Crashers. But before we begin, I'm happy to announce that I have partnered with Gamersupps. Gamersupps is a company that sells delicious energy supplements aiming to help you game at your best. Something I would have loved to have during my No Stat Insane run. Gamersupps has a large array of flavours and even has caffeine-free options for you Seahorse fans out there. They also sell waifu cups that really give Medusa a run for her money. Not convinced yet? Well, if you use my link found in the description or the pinned comment below and use code RECKA, you can get free shipping for the next 48 hours. Combine this with the Gamersupps free samples and boom, you've got free Gamersupps. And if you like what you try, then code RECKA will turn into 10% off after the 48 hours. Thank you so much Gamersupps, and let's get right into the video. After releasing Dad and Me on Newgrounds, Dan and Tom began planning on their next game. The original idea was to have a platformer based on the Alien Hominid PDA games. There would have been a band of heroes, consisting of an Indiana Jones type character as well as a knight, but this idea was eventually scrapped. Dan then suggested making a game all about the knight, which eventually bled into making a brawler type game. However, early prototypes of this game ended up feeling too similar to Dan and Me, so in an intentional effort to stray away, Dan and Tom added hills and narrow fields of play. This would lead to a demo build that would be shown off at Comic-Con 2005.
Yeah, I remember. So this went through a lot of iterations, but I remember we showed this at Comic-Con and people liked it. They were laughing. There was this crazy bug where you could get stuck spinning in the air. I'm sure you remember that, Tom. We used to have this idea where like you could choose like what your role was gonna kind of be, and so you would do like almost like that doing is leveling up original sort of vein of an idea where like,
and also you'd put your sword away to use magic. You'd go
yeah,
between,
you had
like,
to
your
sheath.
magic.
You sheath the sword to do any of your bow attacks or any of your magic, and so you'd have. The idea was that somebody would sort of stick into a mode and kind of become the wizard or become the archer, and so people were going to have like almost like a D&D kind of party that they evolve into.
So in this original build, you were going to be able to choose your playstyle. This could be an archer build or a magic build. And speaking of playstyles, did you know that Castle Crashers was originally going to only have 4 playable knights? These were the Green Knight, Red Knight, Blue Knight, and the Orange Knight. Looking at the enemies shown in this early build of Castle Crashers, you can see how they almost have a fantasy-like appearance. There were goblin-type creatures, reapers, and ogres. We can also see the early design of the trolls, who would be the only enemies from this demo that would make it into the final version of Castle Crashers.
There was no like wizard or factions or anything when we first sat down. It was that you're adventuring and running into these beasts in ruins, and so these are all just things that you might find in the wild. I always wished I would have I had a gnome that was there who was the only unrendered thing, and there was gonna be a boss with a gnome attached to him, And I don't even remember exactly what I was thinking or how we'd make that work.
So we have seen the knights, enemies, and gameplay of this super early version of Castle Crashers. But did it have a story? Well, surprisingly, yeah. So this demo began with the Green Princess being punched in the gut?
She'd get punched in the belly and carried off.
It was the Double Dragon intro.
Yeah.
I was always obsessed with redoing the Double Dragon intro and stuff.
Yeah, the garage door that opens slowly after she gets punched, and then you go to save her. But he puts her over his shoulder and runs off, and you chase after her.
Right.
And that was like the beginning of the demo. That was back when everyone was used to seeing the princess get punched in the gut, because Double Dragon was so well known and at that time. Now it's like you show that and people freak out because they didn't know the reference.
So the game began with the Green Princess being punched in the stomach and kidnapped by the enemies. The gate would then open, revealing the 4 playable knights, as they set off to save the princess. Now this introduction is actually a reference to a game called Double Dragon, which has a very similar intro to their game. But I'm happy we didn't get any princess abuse in the final version. Oh, never mind. But going back to the intro, we can actually get a glimpse of the main antagonist of the demo, who would end up being this large brute type enemy. Now this 2005 demo build did not have a functional map, but there was actually a concept sketch that would have went along with this build. Looking at the map, we can see the castle that the demo begins in. We also have the armory we can go and get weapons from, the forest that you could fight through in the demo, and the enemy castle where the Green Princess was taken to. The final thing to mention about early Castle Crashers is the fact that it was originally being developed for the Nintendo GameCube, but this version would later be scrapped due to Nintendo stopping support for the GameCube and the release of the next-gen consoles. Although never getting an official name, the Behemoth's next game would soon be known as Ye Olde Side Scroller. This was due to John Baez, a co-founder of the Behemoth, telling someone that it was called Ye Olde Side Scroller as a kind of joke. This was then reported on by game journalists and general word of mouth, so the Behemoth just stuck with it. After the reveal at Comic-Con 2005, Dan Paladin felt like he wasn't getting the level of excitement he wanted people to feel, so the Behemoth looked at what they could change to improve the game. This would lead Dan to redesigning the knights into a smaller, more cartoonish character. This would lead into the development of Castle Crashers. Unfortunately, there's not much footage of Castle Crashers' early development, but we do have some things. So here we can see an early functional map for the game, which would later be developed to the map that we have today. Now this is an interesting one. So the King's Crystal seen in Castle Crashers used to be very different. As seen in this early footage, the crystal was a giant black ball that sat above the king and his throne. We then see the evil wizard enter and steal the ball, rolling it out of the castle and beginning the game. Now there's quite a lot to analyse in this footage. Firstly, we see the 4 knights carrying the orb, suggesting they had just retrieved it. The king, who is holding the gold sword instead of his king's mace, then uses magic to float the ball into a holder that is shaped like a bird's talon. Note here that the king's throne has a slightly different design than the version we have today, along with having meat in his bowl, which sits empty in the current version. We next see the evil wizard in his original design, sporting a darker design and a different weapon, but overall, you could still tell that this is the evil wizard. The giant orb then falls as we see an unused eye animation on the orange knight. The evil wizard then rolls out of the castle, revealing that there was originally going to be a gate in King's Castle. Now, one important detail to point out is the fact that there is no barracks in this intro, which would later get added during a reworked introduction.
I'm trying to remember when we changed it. Like, did we change it because we wanted the wizard to be able to fly around on it?
Yeah, I
Or was
think
it
when we did
before
the
that?
industrial sequence where he flies away and leaves the guy high and dry.
Yeah, it's like maybe we just like the idea of him flying around on it.
But I think there was another reason too. We didn't have an intro. We didn't have an intro. You were just thrown into the fight, and there was nowhere to test out your weapon and stuff. I remember when we wanted to like show people how to play, we needed to give them an area where they could take their time for a second. And after we did that, Tom said, "Wouldn't it be cool if like you're in the barracks and a dude just gets thrown through the door and like that's how it starts?" I'm like, "Oh, that's cool." Like it was almost like a Half-Life kind of. You're in the game and like the thing happens. We went with that, and then I think just by going through that, we like reworked and refactored how everything stitches together because then it didn't make sense.
1 year after the reveal of Ye Olde Side Scroller, the Behemoth would come back with a bang. New art, new combat, new everything. Castle Crashers was shown off at many different events and people loved it. It's honestly surprising how much the Behemoth were able to do and change from the original Ye Olde Side Scroller. But there was some assets that was carried over. We have the training dummies, fruit, damage numbers, and even the HUD, which is vastly different to the one we have today. So this 2006 build of Castle Crashers displayed only the player's name, health, and magic. Although some footage showed an extra bar for XP, whereas other footage didn't, and I'm not sure why. In this image, we can see an early version of the barracks. The training dummies are in different positions, there's red cloth on the tables, and there also seems to be no NPCs. Looking at the 2006 version of Home Castle, we can see that the pitchfork weapon used to just be a set piece. Further in the level, we can see one of the players is playing as the alien hominid, showing that even in 2006, there were plans for more playable characters. But what I want you to pay attention to is the Orange Knight, who swiftly changes to the Grey Knight and then the Barbarian. Now this was most likely a dev command that allowed you to change characters' appearances, since this 2006 version of Castle Crashers only allowed you to play as the 4 starting knights. But here's what Dan and Tom had to say.
I don't know if we had them all unlockable yet.
I don't think they definitely. I mean, they weren't all drawn. That's for sure. Because we didn't have the whole. You couldn't get through the whole game, so the characters weren't invented yet. Like for later on. So if they were playable, probably be a barbarian and a thief and maybe a few other things.
Up ahead, we can see that there was no castle store, something that wouldn't be implemented until much later on. Next we have some footage from the 2006 version of Barbarian War. Here we can see that the sleeping barbarians used to have dream bubbles of soaring wood, but not only that, the barbarians were also flipped, so their heads were not on the log pillows.
That's like just an old trope from, I don't know if it's from like 1930s cartoons where like the sawing wood is like them snoring, like they imagine sawing. Like Dan, do you remember that from old cartoons?
Yeah. I mean, they used
There's
to
like
call it
there's some origin
sawing
to it.
logs. It's an old adage where it's like, or an idiom or whatever you call it, where when you're snoring, it sounds like you're breathing noisily, and it sounds like you're
Yeah, like Looney
sawing.
Tunes might have done it.
Yeah, it was just
But then it looked like too much when there was a bunch of them on screen.
the people would actually like say that back when I was pretty young. As people would say sawing logs as like somebody dozed off. I remember, and I don't even know if this is still in there right now, but I remember there was an issue with the Z's being backwards, and we had no.
Yeah, because by default the characters face right. So if you have text in the character and you flip them left, so if you flip them left to have their head on the pillow, then the Z would end up backwards. So the Z had to be backwards.
Moving on to the Barbarian boss, and yeah, that's the boss. So in the 2006 version of Castle Crashers, you actually fought the beefy barbarian that's crushed by the gate. Now this was not intended by the Behemoth and has quite a funny story behind it.
This one, as far as I remember, was like a miscommunication. Do you remember this, Tom?
I always thought he was originally the boss, but then we just went bigger.
Yeah, see, that's not, like, for me, I remember I wanted to have little guys and big guys that could come out as enemies, and I miscommunicated with Tom. This was when I wasn't sitting next to him, and Tom implemented that guy as a boss, and I remember being like, huh? Like, no, he's just like one of the regular guys that can come out, and Instead
Because I
of
remember I
just
was always kind of disappointed because I was like, I wanted to have a bigger boss.
yeah, so it was just kind of funny because we both miscommunicated with each other, and so Tom implements this guy, and I go, no, 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 that's like a regular dude. And when we did, like, we had shown this off, and you fought this guy, and then when we did have the actual boss in place, we were like, haha, we're gonna psych people out who thought that they remember how this goes, and then he gets killed.
Some other things to note here is the fact that there are no princesses, no barbarian children, no boss gate, and an older version of the boss health bar. In this next clip, we get to see the 2006 footage of Forest Entrance, where Snappy was in the game. We also get to listen to the audio design. So in this build, the melee hits had a much more cartoonish slapstick sound effect. Also seen in this clip is an old magic block that would place your knight in a bubble. This would slowly drain your magic the longer you remained inside. Moving into Thieves Forest, we get our first look at the old item select. In this version, you only had access to the bow, shovel and boomerang. But this menu would later get changed as more usable items were added to the game, such as potions. Yeah, potions were not in the game till much later on. But going back to the footage, we can see glimpses of an old magic attack. The way magic attacks work is that you have a combo called Elemental Infusion. This will apply your character's element to an enemy when successfully completing the combo. But back in 2006, all you had to do was simply hold down your magic button. This would infuse all of your attacks with your character's element, with each hit draining a small amount of magic. And whilst we're in Thieves Forest, we can get a good look at the old level up animation.
Yeah, it was cool, but it locked you in place, so sometimes it puts you in really bad situations.
Yeah. Interrupt you in an important moment.
Or like you're juggling something across the screen and you just stop. Yeah, I mean, it was just game feel dictated that it's better to be able to keep hitting things while leveling up. So we just stuck with it.
Picking up weapons in the 2006 build would just say weapon. We also see that the uppercut could be initiated from a single button press, unlike the current version which requires a combo. Moving on to the Troll Mother boss fight, there are a few interesting details I'd like to point out. With the first being that the chest dropped a weapon instead of meat. The second difference can be seen when the Troll Mother is defeated, as the remaining trolls will stay alive. This is unlike the current version where everything dies once the Troll Mother's defeated. And finally, the biggest difference of them all is the fact that there's no old mill, instead being a bush that's similar to the one at the start of the level.
I don't think it existed yet. It wasn't implemented already.
And I think we had the idea of a big monster chase, but I guess we hadn't.
Yeah, we were working towards it. Like if you see a pooping deer and everything, which I think there was in here, right?
Yeah. I feel like that was pretty early on.
That was all tied in with the boss.
This 2006 demo of Castle Crashers also had All You Can Quaff and the arena fully implemented, as in this image we can see a group of people playing All You Can Quaff. What's interesting to see is that all 4 arena modes look identical to the ones we have today, and another detail to note is that one of the arena game modes had the knight's beefy forms fully implemented. This was before sandwiches and being beefy were in regular Castle Crashers. And one final thing to look at before we move on is the very first Castle Crashers trailer. The first thing I'd like to point out is the fact that the smartest character in all of Castle Crashers is not seen in this trailer. We also see that the crystal used to be a darker grey, as the evil wizard steals it. And speaking of the evil wizard, the trailer begins with the new evil wizard design, but towards the end of the trailer, we for some reason see the old design instead. Evil wizard brother confirmed? But before we move on to 2007, here are some things I wanted to mention that was seen in this 2006 build. Orange Knight had a different starting weapon, Red Knight magic projectile caused a lightning strike, Green Knight was normal and didn't backflip, and picking up money made a cha-ching sound. The following year, the Behemoth once again showed off Castle Crashers across multiple events. Now this new 2007 build was very similar to the 2006 one, only having some minor changes, so let's go over them. The music that we have today was added in each level. The slapstick melee sound effect was toned down and had a metal clanging added. The Barbarian's dreams were removed. The new Barbarian boss was added, as well as all the other set pieces. Loot chests and loot explosions were added. Fighting for the princesses were included. A simple version of the end screen statistics was implemented and actually had a different song from what we have today. This These Forest chests dropped fruit instead of a weapon. Pooping animals were added. This These Forest chest also dropped fruit. The old mill was added. And last but not least, the game used to give credit for whoever got the final hit on a boss. Now these would be the last few events that the Behemoth would attend, since 1 year later, Castle Crashers was released. So the majority of 2007 and early 2008 was spent finishing the rest of the game. Unfortunately, there's not much footage of this development, but I was able to get some additional information from Dan and Tom.
They weren't in the original prototype. In my mind, they're there like relatively early on, but I don't know where exactly that is over the course of the
Yeah, I
time.
remember like Dom and I were making other ideas for games before this, and I remember like one of them you could have like pets, and so I think the idea was always kind of in the back of our mind.
Yeah, we had that kind of weird Pokemon-ish thing we were tinkering with.
Yeah, but I remember when they looked really weird in the first set for GameCube. There was no animal orbs. There's no like alternate universe animal orbs or anything. I believe the cardinal was the first one because that one means a lot to me. It was like my grandpa was a bird watcher and we'd always look at cardinals together. If I remember correctly, the first animal orb was the cardinal, and then I think we followed up with maybe Sherbert really early on, and Bipolar Bear I think was one of the first ones too.
So animal orbs were an idea from a scrapped game that Dan and Tom were working on, and it's hard to imagine what Castle Crashers would be like without animal orbs. Actually, you know what? Maybe animal orbs were a mistake. If we take a look at the Behemoth's YouTube channel, they have posted videos on the development of some bosses. In these videos, we can see Tom Fulp's original sketch for a boss. Dan would then take these sketches and turn them into the bosses we know today. The only boss that was drastically changed, however, was the painter, as the original design was vastly different from what the painter ended up becoming.
Yeah, I think this happened at least 4 or 5 times where like Dom would have an idea that he was really set on, and he'd communicate it by giving me a sketch. I don't think this happened. This wasn't like the regular process, but when Tom had like something he was really set on, right, Tom?
Yeah, like there was this. There was the dragon with the sock puppet.
Yeah.
Before Castle Crashers was officially released, we got one final trailer from IGN, which turned out to be a huge disaster. So in this official trailer by IGN, the recorded gameplay was glitched, since in some of the footage, the skybox was completely blacked out, and in other cases, was not flowing correctly. The War Machine was also missing its head for some reason, so this whole trailer was just a mess.
This was only a glitch for like an hour, and when somebody recorded this, I wasn't around for it, and then they put the trailer together and put it up, and I was like, what the heck's going on in the sky? And they're like, what do you mean? And it was a glitch because almost everything in the game's vector, but the skies were bitmap, and there was just a quick rendering issue that got sorted out almost as soon as it appeared. But whoever grabbed the build and made the trailer didn't notice this. And on this day, I think after this, I'm pretty sure we never made a trailer where there's a black anything. You know, we put so much love into this area, and this scene right here with all the guys fighting and everything, like every time you made something look next gen, like Microsoft was like, yeah. So like when we made the crowd fighting and the smoke and everything, they're like, yeah, look at all those guys, that looks cool. And like, you know, the sky wasn't black and it looked really great, and so I was really proud of this area. So I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, the showcase area is bugged. I was so sad, so I put a ban on. I told all the guys, and I still tell it all the time, I'm like, no black. It'll always be a color. So if you see something solid black, no, we're not, like, that's an error.
Everything we have gone over so far has at one point been in the game. But unsurprisingly, there is a lot of cut content and concepts that never saw light, so let's go over them. There was originally going to be a death animation that played upon being defeated. This would literally see the flesh being ripped from the knights' bodies. This, however, did not make it into the game due to the CPR revive system. At one point in development, the princesses and some bosses were going to be playable.
It got tempting once in a while to try making like one of the bosses playable, you know, like walk through the game as the barbarian boss or something, but never actually.
Yeah, we were going even crazier, and then I remember we were, you know, the original idea was that when you saved a princess, you'd unlock her and be able to play as her, and they were gonna have like this crazy screen clearing supers that were on cooldowns or something, and they weren't going to be as effective with melee, but they have this crazy magic.
So the princesses were originally going to be unlocked after you save them, and unlike the knights, the princesses would have had powerful magic attacks, but not great melee attacks. Almost going back to that Ye Olde Side Scroller type of play, but unfortunately, this idea was scrapped. Moving on next to a cut boss that was originally going to be in Snow World.
Well, so I had a tiger that was like from our design document. So this guy was like an idea on like what you might face, and so this is the only drawing of him. There's no animation of him or anything. And later on, yeah, when we wanted to do the well boss, like I was still sold on like having this tiger.
I don't know, like, yeah, I remember the ice one did have like had that boss that we scuttled with the well, where we were gonna have like the princesses.
Yeah, with a tiger hand with all the little princess puppets on it.
So in Snow World, there was going to be a well that had a tiger hand pop out. This hand would have had finger puppets that looked like the princesses, but this boss was unfortunately cut. Also in this image, you can see that Blue Knight is using Red Knight's magic. This ended up being a mistake, as Dan says here.
You know what I think that is? So when I set frames for stuff in Flash, if you go to any other frame, and I wasn't thinking like about that whole stuff, the way those things work in Flash is they'll swap.
Right.
So I think what happened here is that I'm not the one who exported this out. I think one of the other guys who doesn't work in Flash exported it out. And if you were not on the intended frame, everybody would swap color.
The Green Knight is a hot topic within the Castle Crashers community, with you either loving him or hating him. This is due to Green Knight being the only character in the game that has a different heavy attack. Well, during Castle Crashers development, the Behemoth wanted to give each knight their own unique attack, but after working on the Green Knight, the rest of the character's attacks were scrapped. In a past version of Castle Crashers, a fake version of the Orange Princess was going to fall from the evil wizard's temple, with a knife in her back. The idea behind this was to confuse the knights, as later in the Painter boss fight, the Painter would have created realistic versions of the Orange Princess. revealing to the player that it was all a trick. Moving on to everyone's favourite double-chinned animal orb, Hawkster is one of the best pets in the whole game. Upon defeating enemies, Hawkster will retrieve fruit from their bodies, providing consistent healing throughout whole levels. While in an earlier version of Castle Crashers, Hawkster was not as innocent as we originally thought.
That one's one of the funniest backstories in the whole development cycle in terms of like ESRB stuff. Remember, Tom, what Hawkster was gonna do?
Gonna bring you their heart.
Yeah, he was gonna rip their heart out of their chest. He was gonna rip or tear their flesh off or whatever. He was gonna rip the meat off their bones and bring it to you, because that's what hawks do, right?
Yeah.
So he was gonna just rip the meat off of them, but the SRB didn't like that. Yeah, like he's just tearing into people and giving you their flesh, and you eat it. Like it's like, whoa, that changes everything.
Yeah, I don't really know what's worse. Hawkster ripping the flesh from the enemies, or the knights just gladly eating it. And finally, there was going to be a storyline between the bears in Tallgrass Field and the Industrial Prince.
Didn't I make a castle that we never put in the game that was around the bears? Where there was a pile of dead bears?
Yeah, there was like some, I forget how like fleshed out it was.
Yeah, I think I had the beginning of a castle where all the bears were dead in a giant pile, and you walked up the pile of dead bears. Wasn't that the original idea? The industrialists are fighting the bears?
Yeah.
And then you were gonna come in at the battle during these guys, and you kill all the bears, and then you kill all the people they were fighting, because you kill them, and then you find out that they were holding a front line, and you flanked their whole army, killed all of them, and then you kill all of the guys who were fighting. But like, yeah, it was kind of cool because of this idea about like going up on that thing. I can't remember exactly why we didn't do it. It might have had something to the ESRB where you have a million dead animals stacked up on top of each other. But yeah.
Yeah, so the bears were originally going to have a castle made out of dead bears, and we flanked them during a war with the Industrial Prince, and kinda just kill everyone. And we're meant to be the good guys. Castle Crashers was released on the 27th of August 2008, releasing to the Xbox Live Arcade with all-you-can-quaff, arena game mods, and the campaign. Post-launch Castle Crashers would see some major updates, some notably fixing the level 256 glitch, as well as the Boomerang XP glitch. The game would also receive 5 DLC packs that added 7 playable characters, 3 new animal orbs, and an array of new weapons. Now, something that's quite interesting is that Pink Knight was a playable character in the sort of prequel Flash game Castle Crash in the Beard, which came out a few months before Castle Crashers did. Yet, on the release of Castle Crashers, Pink Knight was nowhere to be seen. It would end up taking over 2 years for the Pink Knight to be added to Castle Crashers. Well, now we finally have the answer.
The way that you had to do DLC at that time was you had to make it in advance. Like if you were a downloadable game or whatever, you had to have your DLC approved and then doled out. And there was actually an issue, if you remember this, Tom, but basically when you made your game for XBLA, you made it on a test network with dev kit equipment, and every time there was a new version of the hardware, the dev kits were not updated and the network was not the network that you were released on. So there was this test network that everyone was using, including press. And so I remember IGN had access to this, and somebody else checked out the game, and they actually showed footage with the Necromancer playable with a chainsaw sword, and they showed it before we even released the game. So then people were like, where's this guy? Where is he? And we couldn't say anything. So we were like, uh-oh. They found him a year before he's supposed to show up. And so people were like, where are these characters? But they were already sitting in the files. And I think That was one of the most painful things for me, is to make the DLC but not be able to give it to people because it had to be like slated for later or whatever, and I was just like, ugh, like I didn't like that process. I never liked keeping things from people at all.
So Pink Knight was always going to be a character in Castle Crashers, but they ended up being saved for later DLC. So mystery solved, I guess? But before we move on to the next section, it's worth mentioning that Castle Crashers would later get released to both PS3 and Steam. Now, I'm not going to go into the differences between each version as it is surprisingly complicated, so I'm gonna save that for a future video. 1 year after releasing Castle Crashers, the Behemoth would make a blog post celebrating the game's birthday. In this image, we see some of the Behemoth developers alongside Castle Crasher characters. Getting a closer look at this image, we once again see the unused face animation that was from all the way back in early development. We also see the Necromancer using a different facial animation that is not used anywhere else in the game. But what I find pretty cool about this blog post is the fact that it's from August 27th, 2009. And the Necromantic pack was released August 26, 2009, meaning the playable Necromancer was released just the day before, almost like a birthday present to the fans of the game from the Behemoth. In 2015, Castle Crashers Remastered was released to the Xbox One. This remaster brought improved graphics, higher frame rates, and a new minigame called Back Off Barbarian, which ended up replacing All You Can Quaff. The remastered version of Castle Crashers would also release on Steam, PS4, and the Nintendo Switch. Like before, there are some differences between the PC version and the console versions of Castle Crashers Remastered, but that will be saved for a future video. This brings us to 2024, where we are now getting a brand new DLC, 16 years since the game was originally released. This DLC adds Steam Workshop support, allowing anyone to create their own custom characters and add them to the game. The DLC also comes with a new playable character called Paint Jr. and a fresh design to all playable characters and weapons. Now, this DLC has no release date at the time of this video, so make sure you subscribe to stay updated. And that is the entire history of Castle Crashers. Did I miss anything out? Probably yeah, so feel free to comment anything I may have missed. I would also like to give a massive thank you to Low Polyfire in my Discord server for not only gathering most of this unseen footage, but also inspiring me to make this video in the first place. And of course, a massive thank you to both Tom Foop and Dan Paladin for taking time out of their day to go over this footage with me. We did it on a Sunday at like 8 in the morning, so I really appreciate it. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.